At 59, Cassi Davis finally confirms the rumors. They said she was dead. Twitter blew up, fans flooded Facebook with RIP posts, and even Tyler Perry's phone was buzzing with condolences. It wasn't just a rumor, it was a virtual obituary. But the truth, Cassi Davis was very much alive. Not only that she was laughing, yet behind the laughter was something deeper. A face that once made millions smile now showed signs of change. One side drooped subtly, and her voice had a new rhythm. Whispers started. Did she have a stroke? Is she sick? And then came the most persistent question of them all. What happened to her? For decades, Cassi Davis had played the strong, hilarious, no-nonsense Aunt Bam, the God-fearing woman with a sharp tongue and a softer heart. Her chemistry with her co-star Lavon Davis was so real, so magnetic, fans were convinced they were married in real life. And when she didn't correct the rumors, the world filled in the blanks for her. But everything changed when Cassi turned 59. That's when she decided to break her silence. That's when she decided to reclaim her name not just as a character actor, but as a woman who survived public scrutiny, private illness, and spiritual trials. Because behind the wigs and witty one-liners was a Mississippi girl who once walked away from her dream school rather than compromise her faith. A woman who said no to the spotlight when it meant saying yes to her soul. And a woman who, when diagnosed with Bell's palsy, chose not to hide but to show up with the same dignity and courage she always carried. The face of Aunt Bam changed, but the heart behind her never did. And now Cassi Davis is here to set the record straight, from the death hoax that went viral to the truth about her real husband, to the reason her smile may look different, but is more meaningful than ever. Because sometimes survival isn't loud. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who live quietly, love deeply, and finally speak boldly. Cassi Davis is ready to talk. Before she was Aunt Bam, before she was lighting up stages and stealing scenes on Tyler Perry sets, Cassi Davis was simply a little girl from Holly Springs, Mississippi. A town rooted in faith, wrapped in tradition, and far removed from Hollywood glamour. That's where her real story begins. Not in fame, but in faith. Not with applause, but with gospel songs echoing through small churches and home-cooked Sunday meals around a family table. Born on July 31, 1964, Cassi Davis was the 10th child in a deeply religious working-class family. Her parents were no strangers to sacrifice. They didn't own much, but what they gave their children was priceless discipline, love, and above all, a foundation in God. Her childhood home didn't have flashing lights or designer wardrobes, but it did have spiritual warmth, laughter, and the kind of old-school values that raised strong women. In church, Cassi was more than just another child in the pews. She was a voice, a small girl with big lungs and even bigger conviction. Her talent was undeniable, and by the time she could walk, she could sing. Her voice had texture, soul, and something rare for someone so young, an unshakable sincerity. Singing in the choir wasn't just a pastime. It was her first stage. She remembered years later how her parents never cared whether she got famous. They cared whether she stayed grounded. "My parents never cared about fame," she once said. "They cared about my heart." Her mother especially was her anchor. She pushed her daughter to believe in her own voice, literally and figuratively. When Cassi was cast in school plays or sang solos in church, her mother didn't just attend. She prayed. "Everything I do for God," Cassi would say in interviews. That mantra didn't come from Hollywood. It came from home. Even in those early years, Cassi had a unique presence. Teachers noticed it. Pastors did too. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. She just was. Solid. Sure of herself. A quiet but undeniable force. And yet, even as her peers chased the spotlight, Cassi seemed content to stay in the shadows until the moment called for her to shine. Her adolescence was filled with the usual growing pains, but there was always one constant: her music. Whether in choirs, pageants, or community productions, she brought everything she had to every performance. Her voice wasn't just powerful, it was purposeful. When it came time for college, there was no debate she would study music. But where she had options. Yet one place kept calling her name Spelman College, one of the most prestigious historically black colleges in the country. A place where black women were empowered to lead, to create, and to thrive. For Cassi, Spelman wasn't just a college, it was a symbol of everything she aspired to be, talented, educated, and unapologetically faithful. But sometimes life throws the first test right at the foot of your dreams. When Cassi arrived at Spelman, she was hopeful, excited, and ready to learn. She enrolled as a music major and began preparing for her required senior recital. It was a major milestone for any music student. Most students performed jazz, classical, or secular selections, but Cassi had something else in mind, a deeply spiritual piece, a Christian gospel song that reflected who she was. It was personal, it was powerful, and it was immediately rejected. The faculty told her she couldn't perform it, that it was too religious, too personal. They wanted something more academic. But Cassi couldn't do it. Her faith wasn't a costume she wore on Sundays, it was her compass. Her voice was her ministry, and she couldn't sing something that didn't speak to her soul. In a move that stunned her peers and professors, Cassi walked away. She left Spelman without completing her degree. It was one of the hardest decisions of her life, but it was also the clearest. If she had to choose between pleasing an institution and honoring her faith, she would choose her faith every time. That choice didn't come without a cost. No degree, no backup plan, no roadmap, just belief. In a world where diplomas open doors, Cassi had to break them down with pure conviction. She moved to Atlanta with nothing but a small resume and a big voice. She took odd jobs, sang in local productions, took background roles on television. She didn't have an agent, she had grit. Those early years were a blur of rejections, last-minute auditions, and waiting rooms full of people who didn't look like her or believe like her. But every no became a lesson. Every closed door strengthened her walk. And behind it all, she never lost sight of who she was, a girl from Holly Springs with a God-given gift. Then came her first real break, Spike Lee's 1988 film, School Days. It wasn't a lead role, but it was a start. It gave her a real screen credit. It gave her something to build on. Over the next decade, she racked up roles in shows like Living Single: A Different World and Married, with children. Always the supporting character, always the one who brought something extra to the scene. Never flashy, but always unforgettable. She had a way of making one line feel like a monologue. And even when she had no lines at all, her expressions told stories. By the late 1990s, Cassi had carved out a niche. But she wasn't content. She wanted more than just a role. She wanted purpose. And then, just when the world seemed to be ignoring her, a guardian angel arrived. Chip Fields, an actress-director and mother of actress Kim Fields, saw something in Cassi. She wasn't just another working actress. She had depth, potential, and a fire that needed guidance. Chip mentored Cassi, helping her understand not just the art of acting, but the business of it. How to command a room, how to prepare, how to protect your spirit in an industry that profits off performance. Talent gets you in the room, Chip told her, but character keeps you there. Under Chip's guidance, Cassi's confidence blossomed. She began getting callbacks, bigger roles, more opportunities. And with each new project, she refined her craft, never chasing fame, always chasing truth. Still, the most powerful transformation came years later. After decades in the business, Cassi did something almost unheard of in Hollywood. She went back to Spelman. In 2008, she re-enrolled. Not to prove anything to the world, but to finish what she started for the little girl who once walked away from a dream to protect her faith. By 2009, Cassi had finally earned her degree. She didn't walk the stage in designer heels. She walked in purpose. Because that's who Cassi Davis is. She never lets the world define her success. She defines it for herself, with humility, with strength, and with a deep reverence for where she came from. From a Mississippi church pew to a Spelman classroom. From background roles to Tyler Perry's front lines. From that funny lady to a symbol of faith and perseverance. Cassi's life has always been rooted in something far deeper than showbiz. It's been rooted in calling. And as we'll see in the next chapter, that calling would soon be recognized by one of the most powerful names in modern black entertainment. By the time Cassi Davis returned to finish her degree at Spelman in 2009, her name was already beginning to ring bells, not loudly, not like a blockbuster star, but with that quiet consistency only true talent commands. She had paid her dues, racked up credits, and earned her place through grit and grace. But still something was missing. Then came the moment that would change everything, a call from a then-rising playwright and filmmaker from Atlanta named Tyler Perry. At the time, Tyler Perry was building something rare, a brand of entertainment rooted in faith, family, and humor. His work spoke to the overlooked, the everyday black experience and the spiritual resilience of communities too often ignored by Hollywood. He was creating an empire, but he needed more than actors. He needed believers. And when he met Cassi Davis, he found exactly that. It wasn't love at first script. In fact, Cassi was hesitant. She had come up in the world of film and television, not live stage plays. And Tyler's early productions were nothing like the polished productions she was used to. They were raw, heartfelt, often improvised, and steeped in gospel traditions. But Tyler saw something in Cassi. He saw more than a comedic actress. He saw a woman whose faith matched his vision. He offered her a role in his stage play, I Can Do Bad All by Myself. It was a risk. She'd have to perform live night after night in front of crowds who expected not just laughs, but truth. But something in her spirit said yes. From the moment Cassi stepped on that stage, something shifted. The audience didn't just laugh, they listened. They didn't just see a character, they saw themselves. She played Ella Payne, a strong-willed, faith-driven matriarch with warmth and fire. And for the first time in her career, Cassi wasn't just supporting the story, she was the story. The response was electric. Tyler knew he had struck gold. What began as a role in one stage play turned into a creative partnership that would span decades, with Cassi becoming one of the most vital pillars of the Tyler Perry universe. Together, they would reshape what it meant to be black, funny, spiritual, and seen on the stage and screen. Cassi's breakout character came in the form of a bold, brash, unforgettable force of nature. Aunt Bam. Introduced in the 2010 play Medea's Family Reunion, Aunt Bam was everything Cassi had trained for: hilarious, heartfelt, and completely without filter. She was the aunt who said what everyone was thinking, who checked you with love and laughed at her own jokes. She smoked, she fussed, she prayed, and she loved hard. And audiences couldn't get enough. In Cassi's hands, Aunt Bam became more than comic relief. She was comic release, a breath of joy in the midst of drama, a moral compass dressed in wigs and sass. With every performance, whether in Perry's hit stage plays or in films like Medea's Big Happy Family, Medea's Witness Protection, A Medea Christmas and Boo, A Medea Halloween, Cassi deepened the character, giving her humanity, tenderness, and sharp-edged wit. Fans didn't just watch Aunt Bam, they loved her. But behind every laugh was the weight of experience. Cassi had been preparing for this moment her entire life. All those years of background roles, late-night auditions, church solos, and stubborn faith, they had all led to this not just success, but impact. And the timing couldn't have been more divine. As the Medea films exploded at the box office, Tyler Perry Studios grew into a cultural phenomenon. And Cassi was at the heart of it, not just on the stage, but on television as well. In 2006, she began starring in Perry's long-running sitcom House of Payne as Ella Payne, the same character she had played on stage. But now, Ella lived in living rooms across America week after week. Ella was different from Aunt Bam, softer, steadier, the spiritual glue holding her TV family together. But both characters shared the same soul, the same unwavering backbone, and the same spark that only Cassi could bring. She became a fixture in Black households, not a celebrity in the distant sense, but a familiar like an aunt or a cousin you grew up with. Someone who reminded you of the women who raised you. For Cassi, the fame was never the point. She wasn't chasing red carpets or tabloid headlines. In fact, she actively avoided them. She kept her private life private, her focus sharp, and her spirit grounded. While others were scrambling to brand themselves, Cassi was focused on serving her audience. Every line she delivered was filtered through her own life. Her Mississippi upbringing, her mother's prayers, her college sacrifice, her belief that every role was a ministry in disguise. She once said, "I don't need people to know my name. I want them to feel my heart." And they did. Audiences weren't just entertained, they were moved. Her roles in Perry's productions consistently blended humor with healing. She'd make you laugh so hard your sides hurt, then turn around and drop a line that left you in tears. That duality became her signature. She was both sanctuary and storm. As Tyler Perry Studios evolved into a global brand, Cassi remained one of its most trusted collaborators. She wasn't just a cast member, she was family. Perry himself often credited her with helping shape the soul of his work. In interviews, he called her one of the most generous and spiritually grounded artists he'd ever worked with. And off-camera, she became a mentor to younger castmates, a prayer warrior, and a living reminder that you could be successful without losing your soul. And yet, even as she reached new professional heights, Cassi never forgot where she came from. She would often return to Holly Springs, where she'd visit her childhood church and speak to young people about faith, perseverance, and purpose. She never turned her back on the pews that first nurtured her gift. In fact, she carried them with her into every set, every soundstage, and every scene. As the 2010s progressed, Cassi's star continued to rise. The Madea films kept coming, the TV shows expanded, and Aunt Bam became a certified pop culture icon, quoted on memes, featured in fan edits, and beloved by all generations. But even with all that attention, Cassi remained unchanged. And when new rumors started to swirl about her personal life, her marriage, and later her health, she responded the only way she knew how, with silence, dignity, and faith. She didn't need to clap back. She didn't need to trend. She knew who she was. And eventually, when the time was right, she would reveal the truth herself, not to defend, but to inspire. Because if her rise to fame taught her anything, it's that God's timing is never wrong. And He never gives you a platform without a purpose. At the height of her fame, with the world laughing along with Aunt Bam and House of Pain, airing weekly to millions, Cassi Davis appeared untouchable, unbothered, unwavering, and always smiling. But behind that familiar smile was a secret, a struggle hidden in plain sight. Fans began to notice it, a subtle droop on one side of her face, a change in her voice, a different cadence to her once bubbly delivery. Rumors exploded online. Had she suffered a stroke? Was she battling cancer? Or worse, had she quietly passed away? Then came the 2020 death hoax, an internet frenzy that wrongly declared Cassi Davis dead. Social media ran wild with tributes, RIP hashtags, and emotional posts mourning her alleged passing. Some fans cried, others raged. Even those closest to her, like Tyler Perry, began receiving condolence calls. But the truth was more bizarre than fiction. Cassi was alive and laughing. In a now viral post, Tyler Perry shut the rumors down. "I just got off the phone with Cassi Davis. She's alive, very much alive. And she's laughing about all of this." Yet behind the laughter was pain. Not physical pain, but emotional weight. The hoax wasn't just wrong, it was a trigger. It reminded Cassi of a truth she had been quietly living with for months. And for the first time in her life, she knew she couldn't stay silent. So, in a rare and vulnerable interview, Cassi Davis did something she had never done before. She peeled back the mask. She revealed that in 2020, she had been diagnosed with Bell's palsy, a condition that causes sudden temporary weakness or paralysis of the muscles on one side of the face. It wasn't fatal. It wasn't cancer. But it was devastating in its own way, especially for a woman whose very livelihood depended on her expressions. Cassi described the moment she realized something was wrong. My smile started fading. My face stopped moving on one side. It felt like I was disappearing in pieces. The diagnosis hit her like a storm. There was no preparation, no warning, just change visible, uncontrollable, and cruel. For most people, Bell's palsy is an annoyance. For Cassi Davis, it was an identity crisis. How do you continue acting when your most powerful tool, your face, betrays you? How do you deliver punchlines with confidence when your lips won't form them the same way? She could have quit. She could have vanished from the screen and waited until it healed. But Cassi chose a different path. She kept showing up. Supported by Tyler Perry. The House of Payne cast and her real-life husband, Carrie Patton. Cassi returned to work. Directors adjusted camera angles. Lighting crews worked to soften the visual impact. Makeup artists stepped in. But none of it mattered as much as Cassi's unshakable will. My face changed, she admitted. But my faith didn't. Still, the world around her wasn't as graceful. The internet, with its brutal speed and harsh commentary, began to speculate. Screenshots of her face were shared without context. Memes circulated. Some mocked, some mourned. Some simply asked, "What happened to Aunt Bam?" And the most hurtful part, the silence of misunderstanding. Most people didn't know what Bell's palsy was. Fewer understood how isolating it could be. And Cassi, who had always valued privacy, was now faced with a difficult choice: hide her truth or share it, and risk being seen as different. She chose courage. By going public with her condition, Cassi didn't just answer the rumors, she liberated herself. She allowed others struggling with facial paralysis to feel seen. She reminded fans that being strong doesn't mean being perfect, and that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength, wrapped in truth. Still, her health wasn't the only hidden chapter. For years, fans were convinced Cassi Davis was married to her on-screen husband, Levan Davis. Their chemistry was so natural, so effortless, it blurred the line between fiction and reality. Tabloids speculated. Blogs claimed they were secretly wed. And Cassi, she said nothing. Until finally she decided to set the record straight. In a 2021 interview, she revealed the truth. Levan Davis was never her partner in life, only in art. He's like family, she said, but not that kind of family. With a warm chuckle, she dismantled years of rumors in one honest moment. The real man behind her strength was someone the public barely knew: Carrie Patton, a quiet, faithful man Cassi had known since 3rd grade. They reconnected decades later and married in 2017 in a private ceremony with no cameras, no red carpets, no press, just peace. "I didn't marry a star," Cassi once said. "I married my steady." Carrie became her anchor during the most challenging chapter of her life. Through her Bell's palsy diagnosis, the fake death rumors, and the whispers about her appearance, he stood by her in silence, in prayer, and in unwavering support. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in her. Together they built a life away from the spotlight, a life rooted in faith, service, and quiet love. They didn't have children, but they created a home full of warmth and spiritual alignment. Cassi's decision to reveal this part of her life wasn't about shutting down gossip. It was about reclaiming her narrative. Her silence had allowed others to fill in the blanks. Now, her truth filled the space with dignity. Despite everything, the hoax, the illness, the speculation, Cassi Davis never folded. She didn't fade away. She leaned into her faith, into her community, and into her truth. Because the woman behind Aunt Bam was never just a character. She was a survivor. Cassi Davis was never meant to just entertain us. She was meant to teach us. She taught us that faith doesn't need fame to flourish, that resilience doesn't require applause, and that sometimes the people who make us laugh the hardest are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. She's been misunderstood, misquoted, and even prematurely mourned, but never defeated. Through it all, Cassi held tight to the one thing the world couldn't shake: her faith. It carried her from a Mississippi church pew to Hollywood stages. It lifted her when her face couldn't smile, when her voice changed, and when the rumors threatened to overshadow her truth. And it reminded her again and again that her worth was never measured by symmetry or stardom, it was measured by spirit. She didn't let Bell's palsy end her career. She didn't let gossip define her love story. She didn't let a fake obituary silence her voice. Instead, she rose, quietly, steadily, with grace. Her life is proof that legacy isn't built in the spotlight. It's built in the shadows, in the moments when no one is watching and you choose to keep going anyway. It's in the roles she played, yes, but more powerfully, it's in the lives she touched with her authenticity. Behind Aunt Bam, behind Ella Payne, behind every joke and every tear, there was always a woman choosing faith over fear. And in the end, the real Cassi Davis didn't just confirm the rumors. She rewrote the narrative. She showed us what strength looks like when the cameras aren't rolling. So the next time you see her on screen, remember the battles you don't see, the pain behind the performance, and the power of a woman who refused to hide. Because Cassi Davis isn't just a character, she's a legend of Black excellence. If her story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you to keep showing up despite your storms, share this video. Drop a comment below and tell us what Cassi Davis means to you. And don't forget to subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence, where real stories, real strength, and real Black icons are always center stage.